She begged him not to claim her. He whispered too late and pulled her close. Why would someone beg for something not to happen if it seemed impossible to stop? And what made those two quiet words carry so much weight in that single moment? If stories filled with destiny, emotion, and unforgettable twists are your favorite, subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss the next one. Now tell us in the comments, if fate brought two people together, should either of them be able to walk away? With that question lingering in the air, the story begins at the exact moment when one choice is about to change everything. The hardest chains are the ones your heart cannot see. Olivia Bennet took one slow step backward, her breath catching as the enormous ceremonial hall fell into absolute silence. Hundreds of wolves stood beneath towering stone arches draped with silver banners, every eye fixed on the impossible moment unfolding before them. The ancient Moonstone at the center of the chamber glowed with a soft white light, casting shimmering reflections across the polished floor as though the castle itself had begun holding its breath. Olivia lowered her gaze, unable to meet the silver-gray eyes of Alpha King Ethan Sullivan. Her fingers trembled slightly against the folds of her simple cream-colored cloak, not because she feared him, but because she feared everything his presence meant. "Please," she whispered, her voice barely louder than the crackling torches lining the walls. "Do not claim me." No one moved. Even the oldest elders, who had witnessed countless ceremonies over decades, remained frozen in stunned silence. Such words had never been spoken inside Blackstone Keep. Every child had grown up hearing stories that destiny could not be bargained with. Every Alpha believed the moon goddess chose with purpose. Every Omega understood that resisting fate only invited heartbreak. Yet Olivia stood there, quietly pleading for the impossible. Ethan did not answer immediately. Instead, he watched her with an expression that held neither anger nor triumph. There was only quiet certainty mixed with a sadness, so carefully hidden that almost no one noticed it. He took one measured step closer. The distance between them became no more than a few feet, yet it felt as vast as the snow-covered mountains surrounding the kingdom. Olivia instinctively retreated another step until her back nearly touched one of the marble columns supporting the great hall. She searched his face for hesitation, hoping to find even the smallest sign that he might walk away. Instead, he leaned slightly closer, lowering his voice so only she could clearly hear the words. Too late. Time itself seemed to stop. The glowing moonstone brightened for a single heartbeat, bathing the chamber in pale silver light before returning to its gentle radiance. A quiet gasp spread through the crowd. Some wolves exchanged confused glances while others lowered their heads, recognizing that something far older than tradition had just awakened. Olivia closed her eyes for only a moment, fighting emotions she had buried for years. She had prepared herself for rejection. She had prepared herself for loneliness. She had even prepared herself to leave Blackstone Keep forever, if it meant protecting everyone else. But she had never prepared herself for this. Ethan slowly raised one hand, stopping several inches from her shoulder without touching her, silently waiting for permission rather than demanding it. His restraint surprised even the council members watching nearby. He had the authority of a king, yet he chose patience instead of power. Olivia looked at his outstretched hand before lifting her eyes toward him again. She could not understand why destiny had chosen them, and she believed that if the truth hidden inside her heart ever came to light, everything Ethan had built would begin to crumble. Somewhere beyond the towering windows, winter winds swept across the mountains, carrying snow through the dark forest surrounding Blackstone Keep. Inside the ancient hall, beneath the watchful light of the Moonstone, neither of them realized that this single moment would awaken secrets buried long before either of them had been born, and the first person forced to confront those secrets would not be Olivia, but the Alpha King who believed fate had finally brought him home. 2 days earlier, before the Moonstone illuminated the Great Hall, and before every pair of eyes turned toward Olivia Bennet, Blackstone Keep moved through another ordinary winter morning without realizing destiny had already crossed its gates. Snow rested quietly upon the castle walls while servants swept the stone courtyards, merchants unloaded wagons filled with supplies, and young wolves laughed as they chased one another across the frost-covered training grounds. Olivia passed through the busy courtyard almost unnoticed, just as she preferred. Her simple cream-colored cloak blended into the pale winter landscape, and the woven basket resting against her arm carried warm bread, fresh herbs, and small jars of medicine she delivered each morning to elderly pack members who could no longer travel easily through the cold. She greeted everyone with the same gentle smile regardless of whether they greeted her in return. Most barely noticed her presence. Some whispered that she was only an ordinary Omega with no remarkable future. Others believed she spent too much time helping people who could offer nothing in return. None of their opinions changed the quiet rhythm of her days. Kindness had become her habit long before anyone thought to thank her for it. Inside one modest cottage near the western wall, she carefully prepared tea for an elderly widow whose hands shook from the bitter winter weather. She repaired a loose window latch before leaving, refusing the small pouch of coins offered in gratitude. "Save it for spring," she said softly. "The flowers will need someone to admire them." The old woman smiled through grateful tears, watching Olivia disappear into the falling snow. Across the castle grounds, Ethan Sullivan observed the courtyard from the upper balcony outside the Royal Library while reviewing reports with his advisors. His attention should have remained fixed upon trade agreements, border patrol schedules, and requests from neighboring packs, yet his eyes drifted downward almost without permission. He noticed the young Omega stopping to help a stable boy gather scattered firewood after a sudden gust of wind knocked the bundle apart. She laughed quietly with the child before continuing on her way, as though the interruption had been the best part of her morning. Ethan asked no questions. He simply watched for another moment before returning to his work. It was not the first time he had noticed Olivia. During the previous months, he had seen the same quiet pattern repeated countless times. She volunteered where others hurried away. She listened when people believed no one cared enough to hear them. She carried burdens without asking anyone to carry hers. Something about that quiet strength remained in his thoughts long after each brief encounter ended. Olivia, however, had become increasingly aware of the king's occasional presence. Whenever she sensed his silver-gray eyes lingering across the courtyard, she found another path through the castle, another task waiting elsewhere, another reason to remain unseen. She believed distance was the safest gift she could offer both of them. There were truths hidden within her family's past that she had guarded since childhood, truths capable of changing more than her own future if they were ever uncovered. As evening settled over Blackstone Keep and the first stars appeared above the snow-covered mountains, Olivia paused beside the frozen fountain in the center of the courtyard. She closed her eyes for a quiet moment, unaware that somewhere inside the ancient castle, the Moonstone had begun glowing just a little brighter than it ever had before, as though an invisible clock had finally begun counting down toward a meeting neither destiny nor either of their hearts could postpone much longer. Later that afternoon, the quiet rhythm of Blackstone Keep changed in ways few people noticed, but Ethan Sullivan noticed everything. A meeting with neighboring alphas had ended earlier than expected, leaving him alone in the royal gardens where winter roses somehow continued blooming despite the cold. The castle walls shielded the garden from the strongest winds, creating one peaceful corner where silence often spoke louder than conversation. Ethan had come there hoping to clear his thoughts before another evening filled with duties, yet the moment he stepped onto the stone pathway, he saw Olivia Bennet kneeling beside a small marble fountain. A frightened white dove had become tangled in loose climbing vines after seeking shelter from the weather. Olivia moved slowly, speaking to the tiny bird in a calm voice that carried no fear or urgency. She carefully loosened each vine without causing further distress, then gently lifted the bird into her hands. For several quiet moments, she simply waited until it gathered enough confidence to spread its wings again. The dove circled once above the fountain before disappearing into the pale winter sky. Olivia smiled with quiet satisfaction, believing no one had witnessed the small act of kindness. When she stood and turned, she froze. Ethan was only a few yards away, watching with the same composed expression he wore during council meetings, yet there was something different in his eyes now. Not curiosity, recognition. "You always help others when you believe no one is looking," he said. Olivia lowered her gaze almost immediately. Someone always needs help. Ethan walked closer, careful not to invade her space. And who helps you? The question caught her completely off guard. She searched for an easy answer but found none. After a brief silence, she offered a gentle smile instead. I have everything I need. Ethan sensed that the words were honest, yet incomplete. He had spent years learning when warriors concealed fear, when diplomats concealed motives, and when rivals concealed ambition. Olivia concealed something entirely different. It was not deception. It was sacrifice. Before he could ask another question, one of the castle attendants hurried across the garden carrying an official invitation embossed with the royal seal. The winter moon ceremony would begin in 2 days. Every alpha, beta, omega, and elder within Blackstone Keep had been summoned to attend. Ethan accepted the invitation without surprise, but he noticed Olivia's expression change the instant she recognized the seal. The color faded slightly from her face before she quietly excused herself and walked away much faster than she normally would. Ethan watched until she disappeared beneath the stone archway leading toward the eastern corridor. He had seen warriors face danger with steadier hands than Olivia had shown while looking at that invitation. That evening, Olivia returned to her small room overlooking the snowy forest beyond the castle walls. She opened an old wooden chest hidden beneath her bed and carefully removed a faded velvet pouch. Inside rested a silver pendant engraved with an ancient family crest she had never worn in public. She traced the symbol gently with her fingertips before whispering words she had repeated since childhood. Please let it remain hidden. Outside her window, the moon slowly climbed above the mountains, and deep within the oldest chamber of Blackstone Keep, the Moonstone answered with another quiet pulse of silver light, as though it had already recognized the secret Olivia was still desperately trying to protect. The following morning arrived beneath a sky the color of polished steel, and Blackstone Keep carried an unusual sense of anticipation that no one could quite explain. Servants decorated the grand corridors with silver ribbons and evergreen branches while musicians rehearsed soft melodies that would soon welcome guests from neighboring packs. Everywhere Olivia Bennet looked, people spoke excitedly about the winter moon ceremony. They admired elegant gowns, discussed ancient traditions, and guessed which young wolves might discover their destined futures. Olivia listened in silence while arranging fresh flowers inside the castle chapel, carefully avoiding every conversation that drifted toward fate. She knew the ceremony was only 1 day away, and with every passing hour the quiet weight inside her heart grew heavier. Once her work was finished, she slipped away through a narrow stone passage that led beyond the castle gardens to a peaceful overlook above the frozen river. It had become her favorite place over the years because very few people ever climbed the winding path during winter. The overlook offered a breathtaking view of snow-covered pines stretching toward distant mountains, and for a little, while she could pretend the world expected nothing from her, she reached into her cloak and removed the silver pendant. Once more, holding it beneath the pale afternoon sunlight, the ancient crest engraved upon its surface caught the light for only a moment before she closed her hand around it again. I promised, she whispered softly. No one can know. A familiar voice interrupted the silence before the wind could carry her words away. Some promises become heavier every year they are carried. Olivia turned quickly, startled to find Ethan Sullivan standing several feet behind her. He wore no ceremonial clothing, only a dark winter coat that made him appear less like a king and more like an ordinary man seeking a quiet walk through the snow. She instinctively tucked the pendant back beneath her cloak before he could see it clearly. Ethan noticed the movement, but chose not to mention it. Instead, he stepped beside the stone railing overlooking the valley, allowing several comfortable feet to remain between them. For a long moment neither of them spoke. They simply watched snowflakes drift lazily across the forest below. You disappear whenever the castle becomes too loud, Ethan finally said with a faint smile. Olivia looked toward the mountains rather than meeting his eyes. Some places make it easier to hear your own thoughts. And what are yours telling you today? She hesitated. Countless answers crossed her mind, yet none could be spoken aloud. They told her to leave before the ceremony began. They told her that staying would endanger the future of the man standing beside her. They told her that destiny sometimes arrived carrying consequences too great for love alone to overcome. But she simply answered that tomorrow will change many lives. Ethan nodded slowly. I believe that too. His voice remained calm, but something deep inside him stirred with unusual certainty. Every instinct he possessed urged him to remain near her, even though he could not explain why. It was not obligation, nor curiosity. It felt older than memory itself. As they stood together in the winter silence, neither noticed the elderly castle historian watching quietly from a distant pathway. The old scholar narrowed his eyes after catching the brief glimmer of the silver pendant before Olivia hid it away. Recognition flickered across his weathered face, followed immediately by concern. Without approaching them, he turned and hurried back toward the castle archives, where forgotten family records had rested undisturbed for generations, convinced that a secret buried long ago had begun finding its way back into the light. The castle archives had not welcomed many visitors before sunrise, yet the elderly historian moved through rows of towering shelves with surprising speed, carrying a lantern whose warm light danced across centuries of carefully preserved records. Dust rose gently as he opened heavy ledgers bound in faded leather, comparing ancient family crests with sketches drawn long before Ethan Sullivan had been born. His hands paused the instant he found the symbol he had glimpsed upon Olivia Bennett's silver pendant. The same crescent moon intertwined with an evergreen branch appeared beside a family name that had disappeared from public history nearly 3 decades earlier. He stared at the page in disbelief before quietly closing the book. Some truths had been hidden to protect the kingdom, but if destiny had begun revealing them on its own, no one could keep them buried forever. Elsewhere inside Blackstone Keep, preparations for the winter moon ceremony reached their final stage. Crystal lanterns filled the grand hall with gentle silver light while musicians tested each note until every melody echoed perfectly beneath the vaulted ceiling. Young wolves admired the decorations with eager excitement, imagining the future that might begin tomorrow evening. Olivia moved through the corridors carrying fresh linens for the guest chambers, smiling politely whenever someone greeted her, though her thoughts never left the conversation on the overlook. Ethan's calm voice lingered in her memory, not because of what he had said, but because of what he had not asked. Most people became curious whenever they sensed a secret. He had chosen patience instead. That frightened her more than questions ever could. As she reached the northern gallery overlooking the central courtyard, she stopped beside a tall window where snow drifted quietly beyond the glass.
She
considered leaving Blackstone Keep before dawn.
No farewell. No explanation.
Simply disappearing before the ceremony could begin. It seemed like the safest choice. Yet every reason to leave was matched by another reason to stay. The elderly widow who waited for her morning tea. The stable boy who proudly waved each time she crossed the courtyard. The children who believed she could always mend a torn cloak or calm a frightened animal. She belonged to them in quiet ways they never realized. Walking away would protect one future while breaking countless small promises she had never spoken aloud. At that same moment, Ethan concluded a meeting with his council. The elders discussed ceremonial traditions, guest arrivals, and ancient customs, but one remark caught his attention. The Moonstone has never glowed this strongly before a ceremony, one elder observed. Perhaps the coming bond will change more than one life. The words settled heavily in Ethan's thoughts. He dismissed the meeting early and found himself wandering toward the courtyard without intending to. From the balcony above, he noticed Olivia standing alone beside the snow-covered fountain, her eyes fixed upon the falling flakes as though searching for an answer hidden within the winter sky. He considered approaching her again, then stopped himself. If destiny truly intended to bring them together, it would not require chasing. Respect sometimes meant waiting. Far below, Olivia slowly closed her eyes as a sudden warmth spread through the silver pendant hidden beneath her cloak. Startled, she touched the fabric covering it and felt a faint pulse unlike anything she had experienced before. High above the castle towers, clouds parted just enough for moonlight to fall directly across Blackstone Keep, and deep within the ancient ceremonial hall, The Moonstone answered with a brilliant shimmer that no one could ignore, announcing without a single spoken word that the hour destiny had waited generations to reveal was finally drawing near. Morning arrived with a quiet snowfall that softened every rooftop of Blackstone Keep, but inside the castle the atmosphere carried an energy unlike any Olivia Bennet had ever felt before. The winter moon ceremony would begin before sunset, and every corridor echoed with hurried footsteps, cheerful conversations, and the distant sound of musicians rehearsing one final time. Olivia completed her usual morning visits, delivering warm bread to the elderly widow and helping the stable boy fasten a loose gate before the horses were led outside. She smiled for their sake, yet every smile became more difficult to hold. The silver pendant beneath her cloak had continued to grow warm throughout the night, as though an invisible heartbeat answered her own. She had hidden it beneath layers of fabric, hoping the strange sensation would fade before anyone noticed, but each passing hour only made it stronger. Across the castle, Ethan Sullivan stood inside the Royal Observatory, where the oldest elder examined the Moonstone through an ancient crystal lens passed down from one generation to the next. The elder lowered the instrument slowly before looking toward Ethan with unusual concern. "Your Majesty, I have witnessed many ceremonies, but never this. The Moonstone is responding before the gathering has even begun." Ethan remained calm, although the words settled deeply within him. "What does it mean?" The elder hesitated before answering. "Sometimes destiny announces itself because it has waited far too long." Ethan thanked him quietly and dismissed the meeting, yet instead of returning to his royal duties, he found himself walking toward the eastern gardens almost by instinct. There, beneath snow-covered cedar trees, he saw Olivia arranging birdseed upon a small stone table where winter sparrows gathered every morning. The tiny birds landed without fear, hopping around her boots while she laughed softly at their impatience. For a brief moment, the burdens carried by both of them seemed to disappear beneath the simple joy of that peaceful scene. Ethan approached carefully, making enough sound that she would never feel startled by his presence. Olivia looked up and offered a respectful smile. "Good morning, Your Majesty." He returned the smile with quiet warmth. "You always seem to know where hope is hiding." She glanced toward the little birds, pecking happily across the snow. "Sometimes hope only needs someone willing to notice it." Her words lingered between them longer than either expected. Ethan studied her expression, searching for the worry he had seen growing over the past several days. "You have been carrying something alone," he said gently. "You do not have to." Olivia lowered her eyes, her fingers instinctively resting against the hidden pendant beneath her cloak. She wanted to tell him everything. She wanted to explain why she believed destiny had made a mistake, and why remaining near him placed far more than her own future at risk. Yet promises made long ago still held her silent. "Some stories are not mine to tell," she answered quietly. Ethan nodded with understanding instead of disappointment. "Then I will wait until they become yours." Before Olivia could respond, the great ceremonial bells rang across Blackstone Keep, their deep voices echoing from every tower and rolling across the snow-covered valley beyond the castle walls. Wolves throughout the kingdom paused whatever they were doing and turned toward the sound. The winter moon ceremony had officially begun, and as Olivia lifted her hand to steady the pendant now glowing warmly beneath her cloak, neither she nor Ethan realized that the first secret waiting inside the ancient ceremonial hall had already begun revealing itself, without either of them speaking a single word. The great ceremonial hall filled slowly as wolves from every corner of the kingdom took their places beneath towering banners woven with silver threads that shimmered beneath hundreds of glowing lanterns. Ancient songs echoed softly through the vaulted ceiling while the Moonstone rested upon its carved pedestal at the center of the chamber, brighter than anyone could remember. Elders exchanged quiet glances, sensing that something beyond tradition had begun unfolding. Olivia Bennet stood near the back of the gathering wearing the same simple cream-colored gown she had chosen instead of the elaborate dresses offered for the celebration. She hoped that blending into the crowd would allow the evening to pass unnoticed, yet the warmth beneath her cloak had become impossible to ignore. The silver pendant resting against her heart pulsed gently with every step she took, as though responding to an invisible call. She closed her hand around it, silently repeating the promise she had made years before. Stay hidden. Protect everyone. Leave if you must. Across the hall, Ethan Sullivan greeted visiting alphas and elders with calm confidence, but despite the formal conversation surrounding him, his attention drifted toward Olivia again and again. He could not explain why every instinct urged him to remain aware of where she stood. It was not curiosity anymore. It felt like recognition waiting for a name. As the final guests entered the hall, the elderly historian approached Ethan with unusual urgency. Bowing respectfully, he spoke in a voice only the Alpha King could hear. Your Majesty, I found records that should not exist. A family line believed lost may still be living. Ethan studied the old man's serious expression. Can you prove it? The historian nodded slowly. Not yet, but the crest I saw yesterday matches the royal archives exactly. If I am correct, everything we believe about one forgotten alliance must be reconsidered. Before Ethan could ask another question, the ceremonial horn sounded throughout the chamber, signaling the beginning of the ancient rite. The historian stepped back into the crowd, leaving Ethan with more questions than answers. At the center of the hall, the High Elder raised both hands, inviting complete silence. Every conversation faded. Every movement stopped. The Moonstone answered with a brilliant silver glow that spread across the polished floor in delicate ribbons of light. A quiet murmur traveled through the audience as the ancient crystal shone brighter still. Olivia felt the pendant beneath her cloak grow suddenly warm enough that she instinctively caught her breath. She looked down, hoping no one had noticed, but when she lifted her eyes again, Ethan was already looking directly at her from across the hall. Neither of them moved. The distance between them seemed to disappear beneath the growing light surrounding the Moonstone. The High Elder began reciting words preserved for generations, speaking of trust, courage, and the mysterious ways destiny revealed itself only when hearts were ready to listen. As each sentence echoed through the chamber, the silver light continued expanding until it reached the place where Olivia stood. The moment the light touched her feet, the hidden pendant beneath her cloak answered with a radiant glow of its own, shining through the fabric for the first time in decades. Gasps rose from every corner of the hall. The elderly historian slowly closed his eyes, realizing the forgotten records had spoken the truth. Ethan took one careful step forward, not out of obligation, but because every part of his heart suddenly understood that the mystery surrounding Olivia Bennet was no longer waiting in the shadows. It had chosen this very moment to step into the light before the entire kingdom. The silver light filling the great ceremonial hall slowly faded, yet the silence it left behind felt even louder than the ancient horns that had opened the ceremony. Every face turned toward Olivia Bennet. Some wolves looked confused. Others exchanged uncertain whispers, trying to remember stories their grandparents had once told about forgotten bloodlines and promises made beneath the full moon generations ago. Olivia remained perfectly still, one hand resting over the glowing pendant beneath her cloak. The secret she had guarded for so many years had revealed itself without her permission, and there was no path back into the shadows. Ethan Sullivan continued walking toward her with calm, measured steps. No command left his lips.
No gesture demanded obedience.
His expression held only quiet determination, mixed with genuine concern. When he finally stopped a respectful distance away, he lowered his voice so only those closest could hear. You have carried this alone for far too long. Olivia slowly shook her head, tears gathering in her eyes before she forced them back. You do not understand. Ethan answered gently. Then help me understand. She looked around the hall and saw hundreds of familiar faces. The elderly widow she visited every morning. The stable boy smiling nervously from beside one of the pillars.
The
servants who had worked beside her for years. None of them knew who she truly was, and she had wanted it to remain that way forever. Drawing a slow breath, Olivia carefully removed the silver pendant from beneath her cloak. The ancient crest reflected the Moonstone's fading light, and a quiet murmur spread through the gathering once again. The elderly historian stepped forward at last, carrying an old leather-bound record in trembling hands. He bowed respectfully before addressing the council. This crest belongs to House Evermont, the family that formed the first peace alliance with the royal bloodline many generations ago. When that family disappeared after a terrible winter, history believed every descendant had been lost. He looked toward Olivia with gentle eyes. History was incomplete. Several elders stared at the pendant before opening their own ceremonial records. Every symbol matched perfectly. There was no argument left to make. Olivia lowered her head. My grandmother made my family promise never to reveal who we were. She believed our name would bring division instead of peace. She taught me that hiding was the safest way to protect everyone. Ethan listened without interrupting. When she finally finished speaking, he remained silent for a thoughtful moment before answering. You honored your promise because you believed it would protect others. That is not something to be ashamed of. Olivia looked at him with quiet disbelief. You are not angry? A faint smile appeared on Ethan's face.
No.
I only wish you had never believed you had to carry such a burden by yourself. The tension inside the hall slowly began to soften. Wolves who had whispered with uncertainty moments earlier now watched with thoughtful expressions instead of suspicion. The High Elder stepped beside the Moonstone and studied both the glowing crystal and the pendant in Olivia's hands. Perhaps, he said quietly, destiny has not returned an old name to remind us of the past. Perhaps it has returned it so we may build a better future. His words settled over the gathering like the first gentle snowfall of winter. Olivia's heartbeat remained unsteady, but for the first time in many years, the fear that had followed her every day no longer felt impossible to bear. She lifted her eyes toward Ethan once more, unaware that the greatest choice of both their lives still waited only moments ahead, and that the Moonstone had not yet revealed the final reason it had brought them together. The Moonstone glowed one final time, not with the brilliant radiance that had filled the great ceremonial hall moments before, but with a calm, steady light that seemed to settle over every heart gathered inside Blackstone Keep. The silence lingering throughout the chamber no longer felt uncertain. It felt expectant. Ethan Sullivan looked at Olivia Bennet with the same quiet certainty that had followed him ever since he first noticed her kindness in the snowy courtyard. Now he finally understood why every path had seemed to lead back to her. It had never been about power, status, or ancient tradition. It had always been about the person she had chosen to become. He stepped forward until only a respectful distance remained between them. Olivia's fingers tightened gently around the silver pendant before she looked into his eyes. Fear still lingered there, but it no longer stood alone. Hope had begun sharing its place. Please, she whispered softly, her voice trembling with honesty rather than panic. If my family's past places your kingdom at risk, do not choose me because of destiny. Ethan smiled with quiet warmth, the kind of smile that reached his eyes before it reached his lips. Destiny may have introduced us, he answered, but my choice comes from everything I have seen since then. I have watched you care for people who could offer nothing in return. I have watched you place others before yourself every single day. That is not a burden to fear. That is a future worth protecting. His words settled gently across the hall, and for the first time Olivia felt the weight she had carried since childhood begin to lift. The High Elder stepped beside the Moonstone once more and raised his hands toward the gathered wolves. The oldest traditions were never created to imprison hearts, he said. They were created to remind us that true leadership begins with compassion, wisdom, and trust. Tonight we have witnessed all three. One by one, the elders lowered their heads in agreement. The elderly historian carefully closed the ancient record, smiling as though an unfinished chapter had finally found its ending. The stable boy broke into an excited grin, and the elderly widow wiped away quiet tears of happiness. Around the hall, the whispers disappeared, replaced by warm smiles and respectful nods. Olivia realized that the acceptance she had spent years believing impossible had not arrived because of an old family name. It had arrived because people had already known her character long before they discovered her history. Ethan slowly extended his hand toward her once again, just as he had in the first unforgettable moment of the ceremony. He did not rush her. He did not expect an immediate answer. He simply waited. Olivia looked at the outstretched hand, then at the faces surrounding them, and finally toward the Moonstone, whose gentle light reflected across the polished floor like the first rays of sunrise after a long winter night. With a peaceful smile, she placed her hand in his. The silver glow surrounding the Moonstone softened until it became as calm as moonlight resting upon fresh snow, and a feeling of quiet joy spread throughout the chamber. Outside, the winter clouds slowly parted, revealing a sky filled with brilliant stars above Blackstone Keep. The kingdom welcomed a new beginning not because fate had spoken louder than fear, but because two people had chosen kindness over pride, trust over doubt, and hope over the shadows of the past. Long after the ceremony ended and the lanterns were extinguished, the story of the humble Omega who believed she had to hide and the Alpha King who chose to see her true heart would continue, reminding future generations that the strongest destiny is never built upon power alone, but upon compassion freely given and courage quietly returned.